Welcome back to the All Things Ag Gal podcast. I'm your host, Addison Stoddard. Join me as I learn from the women who cultivate, grow, and thrive in agriculture. Hey y'all, it's Addison. Welcome back to the All Things Ag Gal podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited for this episode. I feel like I say that at the beginning of every guest episode because truly it's such like a treat for me to sit down and talk with these people and then also get to share it with you. I just love it. And this episode, you guys, is so unique. It's just so unique to what the agriculture industry is, specifically to Wisconsin, which is actually so fun. My best friend went to school in Wisconsin, so I have weird connections to Wisconsin. But I always love interviewing new people, learning about them, learning about their ties to the agriculture industry. So before we dive into this guest episode, we're going to talk a little bit about what I've been up to. I always like to start with kind of an update. My job has been so crazy, and it's partially because wheat harvest was really getting in the full swing of things here in Kansas. And then things took a turn for the worse this past weekend. When I was up, so I live in Northwest Kansas. So if you've ever been to the state of Kansas, like where I live in the boonies, as one does when they work in agriculture. But we had some pretty severe weather this weekend, which if you've ever been to Kansas, if you live in any of the I-states, you're not, like, it's not abnormal to have severe weather. Never in my life before would I've known what a severe thunderstorm was, but now it's like consistently, like we're having severe thunderstorm after severe thunderstorm. Well, this weekend was like a whole different level. I literally was sitting in my closet because I thought my house was going to get blown away in the tornado warning. Anyway, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Definitely some crazy damage like in town. There's been people that have been without power for multiple days, and they're finally getting that all restored and taken care of, which is exciting. But yeah, just some crazy weather. And so on the agriculture side of things, that's like a great situation to have that much rain. Well, let's be so for real. It's never a great situation to have severe weather roll through because you don't know what it's going to do. But in the aspect of water and rain, so great for the fact that we just planted, like corn and sorghum are like freshly in the ground, like planting is getting finished up. And so great to have water on the ground. Wheat, however, not the best of situations to not have it all harvested. So it'll just be interesting to see how that is navigated. Wheat harvest is still happening throughout the state of Kansas. So I've been busy with work. And then kind of the fun part of my job is I obviously focus mostly on agriculture, but then I also have like the fun parts about being, agriculture is the fun part about working at a radio station, but like all the typical things that you would think a radio station does. And so this weekend we have a concert coming up and I'm going to help out with that, which will be really fun. It's going to be a hectic weekend, but I'm so excited for it. So anyway, I want to introduce the guest for today. Halei is seriously such a cool guest. She reached out to me because several years ago, she was able to serve as Alice in Dairyland. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this, like I was, Alice in Dairyland is a job. It's actually like a government position. It is very much presented as kind of similar to like a dairy princess, but she pointed out and like really emphasized that it's very different from just a typical dairy princess. It's a full-time job for a year, and you get to work and travel around the state of Wisconsin teaching about dairy. Travel around the state, travel around the country, and like teach about dairy. And so she gives you the full, story of everything that she got to do during her year as Alice in Dairyland. But I think I really hit it off with her because we had similar backgrounds of, we grew up in places where agriculture was prevalent and like agriculture was happening all around us, but we weren't directly involved with it until we got a little older and kind of started making those career decisions. So I am so excited for you to see this episode, for you to like enjoy what she has to share about agriculture, about having leadership positions. Now, something I want to point out is a lot of the people that I have on the podcast, not all of them, like I have all age ranges. Some of them are definitely directed more at like my age. For example, Halei is very similar to my age. And so it's exciting to be like in your first jobs and your first opportunities and like what you could have done in college to get to where you have that position now. But I just want to say a reminder of like wherever you are in your career, these things can still apply. Like taking leadership opportunities, taking internships, taking different things to like learn about agriculture. That's the beauty of the agriculture industry, is it really is for all ages and for all people. So I'm going to pass the baton over to my past self that is now future me for you, if that made any sense. And I will catch you guys next week. Thanks so much for listening and for all of the love and support. I love getting your messages about the episodes, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye. Haley, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I am doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk with you. When you reached out to me, this was like the first time I'd ever heard of Alice in Dairyland. So I feel like I'm gonna learn so much this episode. And I'm sure there's plenty of people that will listen that have like no idea about it either. So it's gonna be really fun. But like I start every episode with guests, I like to kind of get the whole picture of what your agriculture experience has been like. So let's start talking about like your introduction to agriculture. Did you grow up in agriculture? What was growing up like for you? All of that kind of stuff, if you want to start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. That's the one you always see people when they're trying to pronounce Midwest names. That's where I grew up. It's right in between Madison and Milwaukee, the two largest cities in Wisconsin. So kind of an hour either direction. I grew up as a city kid. I was not involved in agriculture at all growing up. In fact, I remember what it was like to not know where my milk came from before the grocery store, which is pretty crazy in the dairy state. But when I got into high school, I joined the FFA program. I had a really strong interest in horses. I started riding when I was about 11, and so that led me to FFA. I was actually super duper shy, so I didn't join until my junior year of high school. I wasn't quite brave enough. But once I got involved, when I turned 17, I milked a cow for the very first time, and I totally fell in love with the dairy industry that we have here in Wisconsin, and everything's kind of built from there. After I graduated in 2019, I started college at the University of Wisconsin River Falls. I was dairy science pre-vet, and COVID happened that spring semester. So my second semester of college, which had a huge impact on my college career. I went back to school the following fall, but everything had shifted to being online. I had a professor that was trying to teach us to IV calves over Zoom, and I was like, holy cow, what am I even paying for here? I don't really have a calf outside I can go practice on. So I made the decision to actually fully drop out of college. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, but I really had a passion for agriculture. I knew I was going to figure it out. I started working on a dairy farm full time. I was also helping on a horse farm. So I was still really involved with animals, realized my high school diploma wasn't taking me where I wanted to go. Went back to school. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Farm and Industry Short Course program. It's a 16-week program designed specifically for farmers. It actually drew farmers from all across the U.S. Started in November, graduated in March. I was the first student in short course history to graduate with two certificates in a single year. So I have certificates in dairy farm and in agribusiness management. And while I was there, I was encouraged to continue on with my bachelor's degree. So I re-enrolled. I started at UW-Madison. That's our big agricultural college, or our flagship college in Madison, or in Wisconsin, excuse me. And I was studying dairy science, again, pre-vet. Sat down with an advisor. They explained to me that my credits from River Falls didn't transfer in quite as linearly or as nicely as we'd like, and I was going to have to stay in school for an additional maybe year or two. It wasn't really clear at the time, and my scholarships were actually going to run out. So I had to make the decision to make a switch. That previous summer, I had been working at Wisconsin State Fair, milking cows for pay in front of people, which was pretty cool, and I met Alice in Dairyland for the first time. So for those unaware, she is Wisconsin's agricultural ambassador, very similar to a dairy princess or a Ferris at the fair, but a whole lot more, which I'm sure we'll go into in a little bit. But
Yes.
for the first time, got to milk cows with her on the news by the end of that week, and that is where I found my passion for communications and agriculture. And that's when I made that switch in college and graduated in 2024.
Okay, wow, that was perfect. You really like did such a good job of hitting all the points. First, I have to say, I feel like there's so many people that get on this podcast and there's some element of FFA that like came into play with. I think it is such like a good highlight for FFA of like how impactful it can be. That's kind of how I was. I grew up around agriculture, but I definitely wasn't involved to the degree that I am now. But thanks to FFA, it kind of like changed things up for me. I also feel like there's a good handful of people that really like think there's only X, Y, and Z way to get involved in agriculture. And then you get further into it and you get the communication side and the media side and like the leadership sides. And there's just so many opportunities. So I think that's cool to see like how you progress throughout school. And I have to say, my best friends went to UW-Madison. And so I'm like, never even been to Wisconsin, but I'm such a fan.
It is the place to go. Like it is a beautiful city. And even though it is the second largest city in Wisconsin, we have cows right on campus, which is really, really cool. So that's something super special about the university.
That's so special. Now, did you feel like it was a difficult, you kind of talked about this transition from going to wanting to do something vet wise to then maybe communications. Was that like a hard transition for you, or do you feel like it just made sense when you learned about more of the communication side of agriculture?
That's a really great question. For me, it was at first a pretty rough transition, just because everything I had was invested in vet med. All my experience was in vet med, very hands-on. And when I switched to communications, I did have my eyes on becoming Alice, and I was pretty concerned that like maybe my background wasn't going to be enough. And I got really lucky. I had a great organization, the Professional Dairy Producers of Wisconsin, which now has been shortened to just Professional Dairy Producers, took a chance on me as an intern, and I got to work with them in their communications. And I managed their mentor program, so I was able to match students with farmers across Wisconsin. Some of these were students from non-dairy backgrounds like me. Some were students that grew up on dairy farms. It was really helping to gain exposure in Wisconsin's dairy industry. And that was where that transition got a lot easier. I got a lot more experience working in the communications industry. And then my classes obviously were really, really helpful for building those strengths that I had already. But I definitely felt behind. I felt like starting over a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's so common that we hear people like switching majors and whatnot, but it can be really difficult to figure out in college, like, oh, I'm going to do something else, or oh, I'm going to change my path. But I do think that owes like a lot of credit to going to class and like participating in internships and how beneficial they can be for even like for work, obviously, but also for experiences like Alice in Dairyland. Now, I think let's just dive in. You kind of mentioned what Alice in Dairyland is. I'm curious if you can dive a little deeper. What is it? What do you do? And then maybe let's talk about the selection process a little bit.
Absolutely. On the surface level, I tiara and a sash, very much giving princess or pageant vibes, but Alice actually goes quite a bit deeper. So I served as the 77th Alice in Dairyland, Wisconsin's agricultural ambassador. So I represented our state's $116.3 billion agriculture industry on behalf of Wisconsin's Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protections. So I actually was a state employee through this role. So Alice travels the state of Wisconsin over 40,000, sometimes 50,000 miles a year throughout the state of Wisconsin. So almost twice around the globe while never leaving the state, which is pretty
Wow.
crazy. She, of course, represents our dairy industry, and she does a lot of work with dairy. That's in the name. But cranberries, pine trees, or Christmas trees, cattle, swine, anything we grow in Wisconsin, Alice will talk about it. It's a really great way for consumers to be able to connect with the agriculture industry. You'll see her at places like the state fair, county fairs, but also on the news, on TV, on the radio. So it's a really great way for consumers to get connected with agriculture directly through Alice. We've had an Alice in Dairyland in Wisconsin every single year since 1948. Wisconsin became a state in 1848, so that was Wisconsin's 100th birthday. They realized they really needed somebody to talk about agriculture, and that's where Alice in Dairyland was born. And originally, she actually spent most of her time traveling outside the state of Wisconsin, so much so she had her own private jet. There's a really cool
Oh my
photo
word.
of Alice coming out of a plane, like leading a sheep. She met celebrities, she's met presidents, she's been all over the place. But as Alice modernized, people started not living directly on farms. Their grandparents maybe weren't even farmers anymore, or cheesemakers, which is very common in Wisconsin. And so we actually started to need Alice a little closer to home. So while I did have some opportunities to travel internationally and outside the state of Wisconsin, most of my year was spent within the state.
That is seriously so cool. And when you talked about the jet, it makes me think of, have you ever watched the Hannah Montana movie? This might be like a niche reference where she like gets out of the like plane and is like, "Hello, New York." And she's like in a cow field. I'm obsessed with that. That's so cool.
Alice? It's like completely the opposite. Like you come from the cornfield and you go to the city. Um, so when I was Alice, I had the opportunity to go to Singapore, Vietnam, and Malaysia. I've never been to a city larger than Chicago, and I've been to Chicago like a handful of times in my life. And Singapore is like about the size of New York, and then it only got bigger from there. So it's exactly that scene, but flipped.
Reversed. That's so
Yep.
cool. Now, when you go, like when you're traveling in the state and internationally, are you going on like farm tours or are you, like you said, are you visiting consumers or people that maybe have never experienced agriculture?
It's a combination of a lot of different things. So Alice does a lot of media. I would say that's a huge portion of her job is because you're able to reach so many people by only visiting one place. And if they tune in and they see you, that's a great way to reach consumers. I also visited a ton of classrooms, over 200 classrooms during my year as Alice. We specifically focused on fourth grade students. However, Alice will visit anywhere from kindergarten through college to senior living facilities. Anywhere that she can speak about agriculture, has a platform, she will go. I was a keynote speaker at the National Grange Convention in Iowa, which was kind of an accident. The U.S. Secretary of Ag was supposed to be the keynote speaker for that event, and I was just doing a couple workshops, and he unfortunately had to back out last minute due to a scheduling conflict. And so 24 hours beforehand, I was alerted that I was going to be the new keynote and had to write a 20-minute speech overnight. So sometimes Ellis gets really, really cool opportunities like that. And then also, it's all about professional development too of the person who's Alice. So visiting a lot of farms, getting to see things that not everyone always gets to see. I got to visit specifically a research swine facility while I was Alice in Wisconsin, and you have to shower in and shower out. So those are really difficult
Wow.
facilities to just get a tour at for a regular person. And the social media posts I was able to make from that actually had like the best results. They reached the most people because people are so curious about what happens behind closed doors on farms.
Yeah, that is so amazing. And there's just so many things that you don't think about when it comes to sharing about agriculture. I think sometimes, I share about agriculture for my job. You have this experience as Alice, and sometimes it gets easy for us to just like assume that people know how things work. And so stepping outside of your element and visiting people that have never been around any of that is so cool. Now, I want to talk about kind of the process of becoming Alice. How extensive, like, is it like pageant energy of people prepare for it for 20 years or is it for college students? Like what does that look like?
The beauty of Alice is that Alice's come from anywhere. I would say my background is more unusual for Alice. I not growing up on a farm, not getting into the industry till I was older, definitely made me more of an underdog. As far as the actual process of becoming Alice, it's about a 6 month period. So you start with an application just like any other job in January to DACAP, the Department of Ag. And out of your resume and the questions you answer, they sift through, they try and narrow it down to about 10. And then you go into the department for an initial interview with a panel of judges. And if you make it through that, they ask a couple quick questions, kind of get an idea of why do you want to be Alice? What's your background? You make it through that, you're in the top 6 candidates for the Alice finals. And then throughout the next couple months, DACAP does a marketing and communications course teaching you how to be Alice. A DACAP basically trains 6 Alices every year. And then in May, it culminates in a different county in Wisconsin every year. So I was selected in Door County, the thumb of Wisconsin. And then I crowned the next Alice in Crawford County, way down in the southwest corner of Wisconsin. And so there's a 3 day partially public job interview. You're judged based on your professional speaking abilities. You have to write a couple speeches. There's some impromptu work. There's some cute quick question and answer. And there's also assignments all the way along that path to prove you have what it takes to be Alice. Alice is not just like a 40-hour-a-week job. It's in the summer, it's especially long, like state fair, you're there for very long days. And so it's kind of proving that you can keep up with what it's like to be Alice and really do all of the different duties she has. So I started preparing for becoming Alice right around when I switched to communications in college. Every job I had, every internship I had, every experience I was building for me was to try and tailor to getting experience to become Alice. But some people, it's not as long. People kind of come across the role maybe late in college. Some people have been building towards it their entire life, which is really, really cool.
Yeah. Do you feel like every single year there's like a good amount of girls that are interested in becoming Alice, or does it vary on the year? What does that look like?
It is definitely like cutthroat. You make good friends. Like one of my bestest friends, I actually met through the Alice process. So like you're friendly, and especially after Alice is selected, I think that makes it a lot easier to make friends with those people. But it is tight competition for sure. And it's really hard. Like these six people that are in that group, like that's a special experience just for those people. And so you want to lean on them and be like, hey, like, what did you think about this assignment? Like, what did you do for this? But at the same time, you have to keep this competitive edge, and kind of keep everything quiet. And so it's a very, very unique experience. And then, of course, Alice, now we just selected our 79th Alice a couple weeks ago. And so only 79 women have ever completed an entire year as Alice, so that also makes it a very unique experience.
For sure. Yeah, that's so cool. And I feel like it can be so tricky in competitions like that where I've known a handful of like good friends that have been state officers, and it's like you want that experience for people, but it's also like you want it for yourself. And so I'm sure that that can add some competition, but what a unique experience to be able to do that. Now, you kind of mentioned like being able to travel out of the country, Singapore, Vietnam. I'm curious if you have like an experience or two that really stuck out to you during your year as Alice, maybe something that was like really motivating for yourself or a really unique experience that nobody else would have.
So in November of my year as Alice, so I started in July. It's a July to July position. So I was a couple months in at this point. My cow, I have a couple cows at home. I did not explain that part of my background either. So I got into the dairy industry by purchasing some animals as well for showing. So I raise Normandy cows. They're dual purpose. So they do beef and dairy. And my first cow that I purchased had her first calf. So it was my first bred and owned heifer, which is a huge accomplishment for anyone getting in, even kids who grew up on farms. When you get that first bred and owned heifer that you can show at the fair is a huge accomplishment. And being able to share that with thousands of worldwide Alice followers on Facebook and Instagram was so special. And it really shows how connected everyone is with agriculture. Even people who don't grow up on farms or have never shown cows before, they understand the importance of raising your own animals and how exciting that is. And so I've had so many experiences like that where you really realize that agriculture connects everyone. Because even if in Wisconsin, I'm not sure what the US statistics are, but in Wisconsin, 1 in 10 people work in the agriculture industry, which is already a huge portion of our population. But 10 out of 10 people use agricultural products every single day. So it really doesn't matter what your background is, who you are, like what you do for a living. Agriculture is connected to you. And I think that was emphasized over and over and over again during my year as Alice.
I love that. Now, I think it's so cool how connected, this is something I thought of while you were talking, is like how connected social media has made us to sharing about agriculture. Now, I'm curious, was that like you've kind of touched on a little bit how media was so important. Were you like experienced in social media beforehand, or was that something that you like learned a lot of in school to be Alice?
I took some classes in school about managing social media presence, looking at like what is your audience, what kind of things should you be catering to. And I also did a lot of deep dives on the current Alice's and how they were posting on social media. Alice has always had a decent presence on social media, but her main channels for a long time was TV and radio, and newspapers as well. But COVID really like launched Alice into the stratosphere as far as social media, which was great. Our Alice at that time, Julia Nunez, she was the 72nd and 73rd Alice in Dairyland. She was lucky enough to serve 2 years because of COVID. But she really took Alice to the next level on social media. And so it was really great to be able to hit the ground running with a lot of great followers, people who were really like commenting, boosting engagement, which was really awesome. And then for my personal brand as Alice, I felt like Alice didn't lean into video work or reels enough. Alice, unfortunately, as a state employee, is like legally not allowed to have TikTok, which I think she would do numbers.
Right.
But unfortunately, had to work through Instagram. So it wasn't quite as successful as I would have hoped, but I still, at least as of until the numbers roll in, I am like the number one Alice for posting like the quantity of reels and videos I made. And I felt like that really connects with people because our attention spans are very short. People don't always want to read a big caption, but they'll sit and watch like a 30-second video. And so that was something I really tried to stress during my year.
That's so cool. Now, when you had like I'm assuming that you've had a lot of opportunities to speak with people that had very similar like growing up experiences as you. How has that been to like share what you've learned with them? And have you like met anybody that's also like found interest in agriculture through things like Alice?
It's been really touching. I was stopped several times during my year by people who were older than me, but also didn't grow up in the dairy industry. I think agriculture can be like this as a whole. It's really hard to get into it if you didn't grow up in it. But dairies especially, it's just a really niche. It's very difficult unless you find great mentors. And even then, you can kind of feel like an outsider. Dairy pride is really, really wonderful, but can sometimes be hurtful to people trying to get into the industry. And so people stop me and say, like, thank you for being Alice because you're doing things I never thought I was able to do. And that means a lot coming from somebody who's older than me. And I felt that way too. Like fairs to the fair never felt like something that was accessible to me because I didn't grow up showing. I only got to show 1 year at the county fair. So things like that. And what's really meaningful too is to visit classrooms in like Milwaukee County and see little girls' eyes light up and realize, like, yeah, I can do this. And you don't have to grow up in it to do it. You can drive tractors. It's not just for boys. Like, those moments are so meaningful and they're really what made that year worth it.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Now, obviously, like you've said a couple times, Alice in Dairyland is just for 1 year and then you move on. I'm curious what you did after you were done with your year in Alice in Dairyland and what you do now if you're still involved in agriculture.
Yes. So my current role is I'm a marketing and communication specialist for Cargill. I work specifically with our North American dairy nutrition team. So I support dairy nutritionists all across the United States with marketing materials, which is really great. I love getting to still support the dairy industry, even outside the bounds of Wisconsin, which is really cool. I develop flyers. I help with brand campaigns, not so much with social media, and a lot of my work is more behind the scenes now. And I've really enjoyed that role and I've grown a lot, but I'm actually starting to make a transition back towards veterinary medicine. This year was really great. I had a lot of really wonderful mentors at Cargill that helped me realize that I loved communication through the lens of Alice, and I realized that my passion wasn't necessarily communication or even agriculture, but my passion really is serving my community. So connecting people with agriculture is a great way to serve your community. Providing food for people through farming is a great way to serve your community. And becoming a large animal veterinarian and helping out our farmers across the state, I think, is a really great way to serve my community. And so I'm starting to actually transition kind of out of communications. However, the skills that I've learned along the way are going to make me a much better veterinarian. I'm going to be able to connect with people in a way that some veterinarians might struggle with. And so I'm really excited to lean on my communications background as a strength as I continue to transition into a new career field.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I think just like you said, there are so many opportunities in agriculture and careers in agriculture that really just like work together perfectly. Especially like just even being able to communicate as an employee or a boss or anything like that is such a valuable skill anymore and not something that everybody has. So that's really exciting. And I'm sure you'll be a fabulous vet. That's way exciting. Now, in your job now and in the future, what are some maybe key things that you've taken from Alice and other leadership opportunities you've had and things that you implement all the time?
Yeah, Alice is all about chasing opportunities, and I feel like that's something I've really carried into my roles going forward is you never know if you don't ask. And even if the answer is no, a lot of times it might be no right now, but we'll keep you in mind for the future because now we know that you're interested. And that was kind of how Cargill fell into my lap. It is the largest privately held company in the United States. They touch agriculture all over the world. It is a crazy, crazy company to work for. And that connection never would have happened if I hadn't been Alice. I made a joke in a speech towards the end of my year that I was looking for a job, and that if anyone was hiring to give me a call and let me know. And one thing led to another, and my phone number ended up in the right hands. And that's how I got the job at Cargill. And I'm very aware I was 1 year out of college. Yes, Alice is a really great experience. However, I had a lot to learn, and the team at Cargill really took a chance on me. And so it's really all about taking advantage of those opportunities. And that's something I'm continuing to go and do as I transition out of comms.
Yeah, that's exciting. I'm curious, I was really excited when you reached out to me because I think sometimes, and I talk about this here and there on my podcast, is that like women in agriculture is transitioning so much and has transitioned over the last 20 years. It used to be that the farmer's wife was the one that was doing all the books and all that stuff. And while that is still common and obviously necessary, there are so many women now that have their hands so deep into agriculture. What do you think? Like, why do you feel like it's important to have a role like Alice in Dairyland? And maybe your pitch as to why you think more people should have roles like this, whether it's in a company or a state. What do you think having a woman representative in agriculture looks like for the state or for the industry?
Yeah, this is actually a question I got a lot as Alice is like, can boys be Alice in Dairyland? And interestingly enough, like, no. And the reason why is Alice, when she was created, was revolutionary. Like 1948, they were like, no boys talking about agriculture. This is for the girls, which was crazy because, like you said, women were not the decision makers on the farm. And it has been really great to see how the program has continued to adapt and grow as the years go on. And I can see a future in which Alice maybe has a counterpart, like an Alex in Dairyland. I definitely could see that, but Alice is continuing always to change. She wears pants now, which is great. Used to be much more like dresses only at these very formal events, and now like I'm getting in muck boots. She's getting dirty at the farm, which is really great. And I'm continuing to see so many opportunities for women in agriculture. Vet med is a great example. That was like the first female-dominated STEM field, and women having opportunities as large animal veterinarians, women having opportunities as farmers. It's been really great to connect with those people throughout Wisconsin.
Yeah, that like gave me chills. That's like so cool to, I guess I didn't even think of that. Like 1948, like what a different time for somebody to say this is the role that we want in Wisconsin. Now, kind of my last question, and I always ask always ask this at the end of my episodes, is what does it mean to you to be a woman in agriculture?
Women in agriculture are trailblazers. And even though it's becoming more and more common, there's still so many spaces where it is difficult. There are challenges. And then I have that additional layer of not being raised in this industry, not always knowing how to talk the talk or walk the walk. But people, the great thing about it is that as women go into these spaces, they are opening the doors for so many people behind them. Without the people who grabbed behind themselves and pulled me up with them, I would not be sitting here on this call. And so I'm still young, I'm still very new in my career, but I really look forward to opening those doors for other people. I truly believe that the future of agriculture in the United States is so much brighter when we make room for every voice at the table, no matter what their upbringing is, no matter who they are. And that is what is so special about having women in this industry.
Oh, I love that. I totally agree. I think the more voices and the more, understandings and opinions that we bring to the table will only benefit agriculture in the long run. So thank you for sharing that. Before we wrap up, if anybody's interested in like reaching out to you through social media or like talking with you, where can people find you?
Yeah, a great place to find me is probably right now LinkedIn. So you can check me out, Haley Heinzel. Otherwise, all my social media now is very private, which is actually really exciting. Um, but I definitely recommend you go check out Alice in Dairyland. No matter where you're from in the United States, she would love to answer your questions. You can check her out on Alice in Dairyland on Facebook and Instagram, or you can head to aliceinDairyland.com and learn a little bit more about her. Our 79th Alice in Dairyland will be starting here soon in July, so it's a great time to get to know somebody new.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to go check it all out. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for reaching out, for joining me today. It's been so fun to talk with you.
Thank you so much for having me.